Good morning, party people, and welcome to the People's Park of Zhengzhou, China. I don't know whether or not you'll be able to hear any music going on in the background, but there is a lot of activity happening around me. There's one of those parks, it's kind of like Central Park in the United States in Manhattan, where there are all kinds of people doing all kinds of stuff. So there are people here doing line dancing, there are people here doing badminton, hacky sack, all kinds of senior citizens doing workouts. It's adorable. It's all these little people back here in the background. They're probably hard to see because they're scattered all over the park, but in little groups. It's so charming. So this is my first visit to the center of China. I kind of think of Zhengzhou as the Chicago of China. It's in the middle of the country. It's a little more industrial. 13 million people. So it's kind of funny, as a dumb American, I don't know that much about China's geography. So it's kind of amazing to see how big this place was. And spent yesterday going to a beautiful history museum where they had a guide there who spoke English and gave us a great tour of the museum. Learned all kinds of neat stuff about the history of the center of China. Really pleasant. It is cold. It's winter now, so it's, I want to say, about 42, 43 this morning. Got up in the 50s yesterday, but today it's only supposed to hit like 47, 48 Fahrenheit, so it's going to be a little chilly. So let's get to your top voted questions from PollGab. The top voted question is from Uno. Uno asks, what's the easiest way to set up a secondary server for failover? My friend runs an app on a single VM. We take nightly backups, but we want a better option than avoiding a whole day's worth of data. So this is a really good question. And I'm going to give you two different answers. One, I think, isn't the easiest to set up. It's not terribly hard, but it's just not the easiest thing to set up. But it's the easiest thing to fail over, and that would be failover clustered instances, or FCI. This is your grandfather's active passive failover cluster. You can do this on Windows Server Standard Edition, SQL Server Standard Edition. Fails over automatically with no data loss in less than a minute. The second thing that I would give you is, I think, easier to set up, especially on existing SQL servers, which would be log shipping. It's easier to set up, easier to keep running, also works on all versions of Windows Server and SQL Server. It's a little harder to do, it's a lot harder to do the failover. It's not something that's going to take you 20 minutes to execute by any means, but it's something you're going to want to practice and rehearse. The other nice thing about both of those technologies is that because they've been around for a really long time, it's not hard to find instructions on how to do it. You can Google or hit YouTube videos, and there are plenty of explanations for both failover clustered instances and log shipping. To the point where you could find a 10-year-old video and it's all still going to be relevant. So I always like that kind of thing, especially if it can be done for free. I'm going to move this around a little bit here, so hopefully you can catch some of the badminton happening in my background. Next up we have, let's see here, Going Anonymous asks, I've set up an extended event session using SP Human Events to track queries longer than 5 seconds in a database. After a few minutes, I see high latch weights, queries are piling up, blocking the entire server, but everything goes back to normal as soon as I stop my extended event session. Any idea why this could happen? You're capturing too much. It's plain and simple. You're capturing too much. Why do you need every query that runs longer than 5 seconds? You may have wait for queries. You may have things that run for extended periods of time that are just checking for the existence of a row in a table. You may have, there could be a gajillion things. So what I would do is, I would ask, what's the problem you're trying to solve? You hear me ask that all the time. If you find yourself capturing every query that runs longer than 5 seconds, you're trying to solve the wrong problem. If you're looking for the longest running queries, for example, simply start back at a higher level and use things like SP Blitz Cache that have data already built in that you don't have to slow down the SQL server to gather for. So, or tell me about the problem you're trying to solve and we'll go from there. Next up, Josef asks, what are some good books for beginners learning SQL? It's so funny that you ask that. I just got sent a review copy of Jeff Iannucci's new book, Learn SQL in a Month of Lunches, and it's fantastic. I highly recommend it. Learn SQL Server in a Month of Lunches. I'm not even going to get you to try and spell Jeff's last name, but that alone will get you there. It's available now from, I believe, Manning Publications, and it's quite good. I've read it, and it's my new default go-to for people who are learning SQL for the first time, specifically the language of SQL. Next up, Juan asks, with the current hardware capabilities like fast SSDs, huge RAM, do you think that SQL Server will be replaced by solutions that do not require relational databases like Cosmos DB? Okay, so Cosmos DB, you pay by the query. You're paying for every query you run. That's also in the cloud, which has nothing to do with the fast SSDs and large RAM that you're talking about there. It's almost like you're saying, well, given how good steak tastes, do you think chicken is going to catch on? Those are two totally different concepts, and I don't think you're quite understanding the technologies you talk about there. Next up, MyTeaGotCold asks, has the lack of column store on Postgres bothered you? No, it hasn't bothered me, but I know it's bothered other people who want to do large relational data warehouses on Postgres. I have no experience with the extensions or alternate versions of Postgres that allow you to do that, but I know they're out there. If you Google for columnstore Postgres, you'll find a few. Next up, Dogpool asks, what is your opinion of the new SQL Server extension for VSCode? I have no idea. I haven't used it at all. I try every now and then. VSCode seems like it would be the perfect platform for me because I like using the Mac. I want something that's native in the Mac, and it also handles Markdown pretty well. So I would think that it would be a nice kind of thing that I could use to do a lot of stuff I want to do. But the problem is I always want to meet people where they are in terms of consulting. And because I don't teach a lot of SQL Server developers who use VS Code, it's just not the platform that I want to put up on the screen in order to teach people stuff. It could be great. I've never personally used it. I haven't heard anything bad about it either as far as that goes. Joseph asks, should data, logs, tempdb, and backups be placed on separate partitions when installing SQL on a local machine with local storage? Boy. Y'all ever get tired of me saying it? What's the problem you're trying to solve? I wonder if you do. I should probably figure out a way to have that show up in PollGab when you ask a question. Like the first question should be, you post whatever your question is. And then the second question should be, what's the problem you're trying to solve, so that it follows up with that. Because like by separating stuff on the same disks into a bunch of partitions, what do you think that solves? Doesn't solve any problems. Next up, Mary Puppins says, found a SQL VM query that's suffering for parameter sniffing, but I can't refactor it because it's embedded in C#. Any tips? Yes, Mary, I have an entire class called Mastering Parameter Sniffing, where I give you all kinds of ways to solve parameter sniffing. I show you how to do it with index tuning. I show you how to do it with query store hints. Show you how to do it with much more stuff than that when you can't fix the code. So go to BrentOzar.com, click training up at the top, and you can be one of the many people who pay for my vacations to glamorous places like Zhengzhou, China. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. Joseph asks, do you have any plans to visit India in the future? I'm just curious since I saw that you're visiting China and Japan. No, for me, not really. It's not been a high priority for me because it's relatively expensive as an American to get over there. It's a really long travel journey, and I don't have any family over there. Whereas at least with Eve's family is here in China, so that makes it, specifically in Zhengzhou, that makes it really easy for me to justify coming over here. I say for me to justify, you know, you don't really have a choice. You have to visit your family, right? My mom's a little pissed off right now because I came over to China before I went up to visit her in 2024, and she lives in Illinois. But look, in fairness, Mom, I told you you should come down to Las Vegas. Between one of us traveling, you should come to Las Vegas. I shouldn't go to Illinois. Next up, Ricardo asks, hi Brent, on a new customer's production server, hey, remember, here's the thing. When you're asking for help, don't say my client, don't say my customer, just say I have. That way you don't seem like a consultant who's trying to get someone else to do your work for free. Says, I can see everything coming from a VB SQL generator is using ReadUncomitted. Can this slow down performance? Well, it's a shame that your client didn't hire someone who knows the answer to that question, right? So, can no-lock slow down performance? Not necessarily, but it can produce incorrect results. The thing that I'd be much more worried about is those incorrect results. If you go search for Brent Ozar no-lock, I have a bunch of video demos out there showing you how no-lock produces incorrect query results. That's the place where I would start with my new client that I took on that I didn't have the skills to work on. Next up, Vishnu. Vishnu says, what are your pros and cons of having your SQL Server Data Warehouse VM and your transactional VM on two separate VMs versus a single VM? What do you see more of? Generally, if you have enough of a workload that you need a whole separate data warehouse, it's generally going to end up on its own VM because you want to isolate those workloads that users are writing terrible reporting queries. They're doing select star from table order by something. You want to isolate that workload, and the only way you're going to get that level of isolation is to put it on a separate VM so that then products like VMware and Hyper-V can make sure those two VMs don't compete with each other. There's nothing really good in SQL Server that prevents two instances from stepping on each other, especially in terms of things like storage throughput. Ricardo asks, how should I handle my manager who insists on changing production data himself in order to fix immediate application issues? All my advice and coaching is ignored. Okay, so I've run into this problem too over my career where I've had people, not necessarily managers, sometimes it's managers, sometimes it's the company owner. I worked with one client where the company owner would go into the SQL Server from time to time and fix things, and we know how some of those fixes went. So the thing that's worked the best for me is to sit down with the person who's doing the interfering and say, or the interfering or the doing the things you don't want them to do, and say, okay, how can I best support you in your role? What is it that I can do as, database administrator, architect, whatever it is that you're doing? What's the best thing that I can do to support you in your role? And their answer may be to stay out of the way. Their answer may be, I only hired you to do the things that I can't do myself. And then that helps you kind of get this stuff out in the air so that everybody's on the same page. Sometimes they don't want to be doing the work. It's just that they don't trust you. And being in that, closed private room there suddenly helps open people's eyes and helps them take the poker face off and be more honest with you about why they're not letting you do the work, why they don't trust your advice. As a consultant, I have the weird role where I can tell people if they're not taking my advice. I can sit in that private room and go, okay, look here, how can I best serve you? Because I've tried giving you a few pieces of advice, but you're not taking that advice. I don't want to waste your time if you're not going to take my advice. I'm not going to give you that advice anymore. Is there anything left that you need me to do in this relationship in order to move this thing forward? And maybe you're working on the wrong stuff. Maybe you're working on things that they didn't hire you to do. I've also had client relationships end that way, where someone says, you know what, I think I've got it all under control. I'm going to run with it from here. In which case I'm like, go with God. Good luck. But if you want me to make things fast while you're actively working against me, and I'll give you an example. This is turning into a long video. I'll give you an example. Company brought me in order to improve performance, and we're working together in a conference room. There are a bunch of us in there looking at the SQL Server, troubleshooting. I said, right now it's slow because there's someone running a backup from their desktop. I don't know who this login is, but does anyone know who this login is? And everybody kind of looks around at each other, and it was the CEO. And I was like, well, that seems odd. Why would the CEO be running a backup from their desktop? I said, let's go ask. And they're like, we shouldn't do that. And I'm like, no, we actually should. So we go in and ask, and the guy's on the phone. So I just, talk with his secretary and wait. And as soon as the phone calls over, I'm like, hey, I see that you're running a backup on the SQL Server. I'm a consultant that they brought in order to make this thing go faster. Can you walk me through why you're running a backup on your desktop, literally their desktop computer? He said, oh yeah, from time to time I run a backup on the production SQL Server, and I run it to this USB drive right here, and I take the USB drive home with me for an offsite backup. And I said, I'm going to guess that you do this during the day while you're at work, right? You probably do it, during the day because you kick off the backup command while you've got the drive plugged in. And he said, yep. Meanwhile, everybody else in there is absolutely horrified. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. I'm like, no, it's okay. If this is, to the CEO, if this is what makes you comfortable and makes you happy, how about you use 2 USB drives? So every day at the end of your day, you plug one of the USB drives in, and you have a scheduled task on your machine to run the backup to that USB drive. Then that way, when you come in the morning, there's a backup that's already done. You can take it out. You can take that one home with you if it makes you feel better, and then switch over to the other one. And that way, we're not running backups in the middle of the day while people are trying to do their work. And the CEO was like, that makes total sense. That's totally reasonable. And right about now, some of you are horrified that I would recommend that solution. Well, I'm not done with that story. Well, I said, okay, great. I'm glad we're on agreement. They're all on the same page. Oh, hey, as long as you're okay with the backup happening overnight, would it be okay if someone else did the backup? Because we could make it happen faster if we plug this USB drive into a certain server in the data center. Then the backup will go really quickly. And we can delegate this to someone else. We can have it so that they just put the USB drive on your desk in the morning so that you can do whatever you want with it, and you'll always have the freshest, latest backup. The guy was like, okay, sure. I was like, as long as we're doing that, would it be even better if we just got the backup off-site? Like if we figured out how to do it, we either hired a third-party company or we copied it to a network share somewhere else so that it was already off-site somewhere. And he's like, yeah, I guess that would make sense. And I was like, great. Because what we're going to do instead of all of this USB unplugging crap is we're going to give you read-only remote access to a network share in the DR data center where we're already syncing backups from one place to the other. And you can just go look anytime you want. You can go see the backup. And if you want to restore it, you can. And at that point, he kind of realized that he was micromanaging, and then that helped us have a little conversation with him about what he should be doing in the database versus what other people should be doing. But a lot of what you do as a tech professional is mentoring and educating people who are doing something that you don't want them to do, but you got to meet them where they are. You'll hear me say that often about training class stuff too as well. All right, we've been going for a while. We'll do one more question. Let's see here. My phone went to sleep, so I'm refreshing PollGab. Let's see here. Let's pick something. Oh, Kyle. Kyle says, how do you go about trying new skills or concepts that you're learning? When I'm trying to learn something, I often get stuck at the I have a hammer, where can I find a meaningful nail to hit stage? So some people in here are automatically going to think, well, Brent is going to tell them what's the problem, or Brent's going to ask them, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And then that way you're only learning things that are related to the tool that you're using. It's not like you're learning nuclear physics when in reality you need to build an outhouse or something. And there's an element of that that's true. But also when you just want to go learn stuff for your next job, part of what you want to do when you're learning a technology is you want to say, all right, how would I test this? How would I take Stack Overflow database is such a great example because it's large enough that it can mimic a lot of problems that are out there. Let's say that you wanted to learn some of the new JSON technology that's coming out in SQL Server 2025. What you might ask is, all right, how do I take one of the Stack Overflow tables, take several of the columns and store them as JSON instead? So the first part of my learning, before I go learn the new features that are supposed to make things better, is to go make a table that has the stuff that I want in it, and then go simulate what is it that the customers would ask me to do with this data that I need the new feature for. It's kind of like test-driven development. Test-driven development is when you write the unit tests first before you write the actual code, because it helps you better understand the problem that you're trying to solve. Building a fake situation with the Stack Overflow database has been really helpful for me when I'm trying to learn a new feature, because I want to know firsthand what are the pains with this feature that the new thing purports to solve. What is it that's so terrible about it? And often I do learn, like with playing around with JSON, you learn very quickly how painful and CPU intensive it is to query that stuff without having indexes, for example. So yeah, build fake scenarios, work on the fake scenarios, and if you can't build a scenario where you would understand what the thing would be used for, that's your clue that you probably shouldn't be learning that thing. Because people bring out stuff all the time where they're like, hey, we got this brand new shiny hammer. And you ask them, what's it good for? Well, you know, we're still trying to figure that out. So, yeah, there you go. All right, so I am going to go probably walk around the park. I'm going to move around a little this way so you can see some of the other action that's happening out here. I'm going to go walk around the park for a while, enjoy this really big park. It is a lot like Central Park, not quite that big as New York is, but quite pretty. A lot of really nice landscaping. And then it's time for a spa day. We're actually going to a spa here. I've been walking around a ton for the last few days, so it's time to go kick back and enjoy myself. Eve swears by a spa here, so I'm really curious to see how that goes. I said, what kind of services do they have at the spa? And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, is it like hot pool, cold pool, massages, skin wraps, foot massages? You know, what is it that they do there? And she's like, yes, all of that. Plus they have an arcade room, a PS5 room. I'm like, wait, that's not a spa. A movie theater, restaurant, bar, meditation rooms, steam rooms. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, this is sounding like my kind of place. I'm like, also, it sounds expensive. How much is it? Because in the United States, spas are pretty expensive. She's like, it's $25 a day. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. That is a good thing about China for sure. All right, so I hope you all had fun and learned something, and I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios.